Welcome to another Boat of Garten talk, and it's great that you can join us tonight again. So it's fantastic evening we've got ahead of us, and I'm really delighted that we've got Adele Pennington, who's agreed to be our presenter tonight. And Adele has really got a huge reputation in the outdoors, and is one of the best high altitude climbers around today. She's proved her mettle by climbing 6 of the 8,000-meter peaks, and has climbed in all the greater mountain ranges around the world, putting up first ascents on a number of peaks. So we're going to hear a lot about that tonight, but I think we're also going to hear about Adele's story. You know, the hows and the whys and the whats that she's been doing. How did she get into the outdoors in the first place, and how's her career developed and gone along to get to such a formidable reputation. So it's fantastic that Adele's been with us and agreed to be with us tonight. We've had a few IT problems, which is why we're a little bit late in starting. So Adele froze at various points, but hopefully we've resolved those now. But if there are any glitches as the night goes on, please bear with us, and we'll do our best to run it smoothly along. Please do post questions as Adele's presentation goes along, so we can have a really good full Q&A at the end of the talk. But for now, I'm just going to pass you across to Adele and allow her to dominate the screen with her presentation. So many thanks, Adele, for being with us tonight, and good luck. I hope the IT holds out and you have a great night. Thanks a lot.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Yes, I'm a few technical hitches. I'm now sat on the naughty step on the stairs because that's close to the router. And the naughty step was probably a place that I sat quite a lot during my younger years. And here's me at about age 6 on this first photo. And this was perhaps the age where I actually started my mountain career, or perhaps not a career, but I remember that my stepdad took me up Snowdon, got us lost, ended up at Penny Pass car park, ended up at Llanberis, and then having to walk up back to Penny Pass. But at my age of 6, I remember getting back to the caravan, and after my mum had calmed down a little bit, said that my next mountain I was going to climb was going to be Everest. However, living in Corby, Northamptonshire, and from a sort of very normal background, my mum said, well, there won't be that much chance of that, young lady. So I went through school and really didn't actually start climbing again until my 20s. I did a little bit at school, but I became a little bit obsessive when I eventually started doing a PhD at York University. And here's some climbing some routes. This is with a lady called Sue Savage, or that was her name, in the Alps in the late 80s. And we just kept going every summer. I just wanted more and more and more. But like most people, we have to get proper jobs. And I was doing a PhD at York, and I thought, well, the best job I could probably get would be a teacher, because then that would give me some school holidays to go traveling and go mountaineering. So I became a teacher of chemistry and outdoor education. And that was fine until in 1998, I was offered the chance to go and climb this mountain, which is Amadablam. And I'd met some guys in New Zealand, actually, and they said, would you like to come and do a winter ascent of Amadablam? Well, at that stage in my career, I hadn't climbed higher than Mont Blanc, and it was a little bit ambitious. And also, this trip was to run in December. Now, for all of us that are school teachers, December isn't the best month to go away. So after a little thinking, well, not much thinking, I decided that I would go to my headmistress and ask for some unpaid leave, which I was actually granted, and off we went to Nepal. This was an unsupported expedition. We didn't have any Sherpas, so it was all about fixing the ropes and doing it all yourself. And there's Ted on the rucksack there. He features quite strongly in my mountaineering career. He's now 23. and off we set. You know, I really didn't have much of a clue what high altitude mountaineering was about at this stage. And yeah, it was great. I seemed to be able to acclimatise well. Here we are, sat actually at the top of Lhotse before going on to climb Amadablam, and went off. And I think it was about the 4th of December, 5th of December, we summited on the Amadablam, and I was climbing with a guy called Mike. And on the way down, Mike really lost it. He was absolutely shattered. And I did realise at this stage that climbing a mountain is not just about getting to the top, but it's most important that we do get down. So this was in 1998, and I became eager beaver to climb, and do more climbing. And the following year, I went out to the Alps, and here's a picture of Piliacordia, not particularly attractive mountain, and I don't know whether my cursor will show you, but there's a route that comes up here on the Grand Chameau, sorry. And it was whilst climbing this route, we'd topped out, we're doing really well, and we got to the last but one abseil. Now, this is before the time of mobile phones and things like that. And we're just pulling the ropes down, and they got jammed. And I remember saying to the guy that I was climbing with at the time, don't worry, I'm going to go back up and see what's happened and try and sort this out. Well, as I was prosecuting back up, there was a storm blowing in, the ropes were getting iced, and I thought, right, better be safe than sorry. I'll just come back down to the belay, we'll sit it out, and hopefully it'll be a nice sunny morning in the morning and we can sort things out. I made one fatal mistake, well, not fatal mistake, but I did make one mistake in that when I was coming back down, I was reverse prosecuting and I was taking a clove hitch back up and doing everything safely. And then I swung into the belay, and unfortunately my prussik's released on the rope and I started whizzing down the ropes. And the big one mistake is that when we were pulling the ropes through, we'd taken the knots out at the end. When I was going back up, I didn't put the knots back in. So I came down rather quickly, fell 30 metres into that Bergschund, where I spent the next 17 hours before being finally rescued. And I realised I was in a bit of a state. I realised I'd probably broken my back because I couldn't move anything from my lower body, my pelvis, because I'd wet myself, and I was a little bit sort of not quite the right shape. But eventually I was rescued and spent some time in Chamonix Hospital before coming back home and getting myself back to fitness. At this stage, I was living in a place called Great Ayton, and which is in Middlesbrough, and I'd had obviously some time off school. I then went back to teaching, and I remember my headmistress saying to me, you come back full time or not at all. So I went back full time, and I tell you what, I was a bit grouchy with the kids. And it was then I realised that actually, if I'm going to pursue a life climbing, then I need to be doing it full time, not part time. And so what I did was I handed in my resignation and started getting myself back to fitness and doing more expeditions. Went off to Bolivia, climbed some new peaks, and just started off in a new career. Unfortunately, I started that career in the year of foot and mouth. But eventually, I sent my CV off to Jagged Globe, which is an expedition company that I've belonged to for quite a time now. And I was offered position to lead some treks. And I have to say, my time with Jagged Globe was absolutely superb. It opened up so many opportunities. And this is a picture just flying out from Mount Vincent after being in Antarctica. And it was when I realised on this trip, when I was going home after being delayed on the ice a little bit, thanks to Di Gilbert, who may be watching, that's another story. I realised that, you know, time was getting on. I was getting older and I hadn't quite achieved my dream. And my dream was to climb Everest. So it was sort of through the next few months, I was sort of coming up and hatching a plan. But I suppose I could never afford to pay the $60,000 US that you need to go and pay to climb Everest, and I really didn't want to go as a client. So my only opportunity would be to actually guide. So in order to guide an 8,000 meter peak, especially Everest, then you need some experience at climbing 8,000 meter peaks. So I asked the managing director of Jagged Globe if I could take some unpaid leave. That's the second time, good card to play, and assistant lead a Cho Oyu trip. So Cho Oyu, probably one of the most straightforward 8,000 meter peaks, still has its dangers, relatively low, 8,201 meters. And he agreed to that. So my plan was to go out and work with a guy called Neil Short and just assistant lead and sort of start training on the 8,000 meter peaks. Just as this trip was going to leave, Simon said to me, Adele, actually, I don't want you to go to Cho Oyu. I'd like you to go to Shishmapangma instead. I was like, Shishmapangma? Where's that then? He said, don't worry, it's another 8,000 meter peak. And yes, you will be the leader. Now, I was a little bit worried about doing this trip. Firstly, because I hadn't led an 8,000 meter peak, but Simon assured me that I'd probably be okay. So off I went to Shishmapangma, which is probably about 40, 50 kilometers from Cho Oyu. And I had 3 clients. And unfortunately, on this particular trip, our weather wasn't good. These are our tents. And in fact, I remember that Ted was buried in one of those tents. And it was obvious with the amount of snow we'd had, there was absolutely no way we could keep on pushing on this expedition. You know, there was avalanches coming down. So after quite a long time, we decided that it was time to go home. But then I thought, well, I could send the clients home, and I'm actually not that far from Cho Oyu. So if I could thumb a lift round to Cho Oyu, as you do on the Tibetan highway, I might even be able to meet up with the team and still get a chance of getting up to an 8,000 meter peak. So we got back down to Shishmapangma base camp. I said goodbye to the clients, and literally I thumbed my way across the Tibetan highway and started walking in to Cho Oyu base camp. And here's a picture of my yak that I was hiring. And I remember these two. This is a mother and daughter who gave me their potatoes for the night that they'd cooked for themselves, and I slept in their tea house. On the way up to Cho Oyu base camp, I had a radio with me that we'd been using on Shishmapangma, and I got the news that the Jagged Globe team had just summited. Well, sometimes you're really pleased, sometimes you're really jealous. Yeah, I was like, oh, perhaps I've missed my chance there. But what I'll do is I'll go up to Camp 1 and I'll see the clients coming back down and say hello. So that's what I did. I went up to Camp 1. And when I was at Camp 1, I was on the radio to the Sherpas. And I knew one of the Sherpas pretty well called Mingma. I said, Mingma, will you do me a favour? Will you leave me a tent, any oxygen, any food at Camps 3 and 2? And I remember him saying over the radio, Didi, which means little sister, you're going to be very naughty. I said, yes, and don't tell anybody. And so said goodbye to these clients. And then the weather was perfect. I started to wander up Cho Oyu by myself. There were some Russians in some camps, not that they'd help you. But I remember this is Camp 2. And I remember that feeling of being very much on your own. Eventually, I got up to Camp 3, and there was another tent there. And in fact, a Sherpa from another team dived into my tent without a sleeping bag, made me a cup of tea. And then at midnight, he woke me up and go, Didi, you must go, you must go. And I tell you what, I was a little bit scared. I put on the oxygen. I managed to work out how it worked. And off I went. And within a few hours, myself and Ted were stood on the top of Cho Oyu. And it was absolutely amazing. There was Everest and the Himalayas lying out in front of me, and it was like, wow. But I remember getting a wee bit scared on the way down, collecting all my kit, sledging all the tents down, and it was this chap here, this was when we got down, that I hired to come and help me carry everything off the mountain and back down to base camp. I I remember then getting back across the Tibetan Plateau, getting back to Kathmandu, getting back to the office and getting a good telling off from the managing director of Jagged Globe, saying that I was pretty irresponsible. And perhaps looking back now, I mean, I don't think I'd have the courage to do it now. But yes, it was a bit irresponsible. But what a way to get your first 8,000 metre peak. That following spring, I went off to Manaslu. That following autumn, I went off to Manaslu and we made the first ascent. I was guiding the team on that, and we made the first commercial ascent of Manaslu. So I was on a bit of a roll, really, 3 8,000 metre peaks in a year. But it was still my dream to be able to guide Everest. And I remember one day I was back at the office and Simon called me into his office and said, "All right, Adele, I've got something to tell you." I'm like, "Oh yeah, what is it? What have I done wrong now?" He actually said, "Janet Pickett, who is one of the clients on that Everest trip, would like you to be her one-to-one guide on Everest the following spring." Well, you can imagine, how I felt. My dream, it was like my dream's coming true. Wow, I am going to Everest. And it was just like, this is the best news I could ever have. And the following spring, there we were, Everest. Doesn't really need you to name it. There's a Khumbu Icefall. And Janet and I had a brilliant trip, actually. There was no major avalanches. It wasn't too busy. This was in 2008. We teamed up, just the pair of us. And there was us on the South Summit. And although we were part of a bigger Jagged Globe team, and the boys were a couple of hours ahead of us, it was just wonderful. We had time to look around. We didn't care that we were slower than the others. The mountain was in good condition. That's a Hillary step, not like the pictures you've seen more recently of Everest. And there was Janet and I. She was the 21st British woman and I was the 22nd to stand on the summit of Everest. So, yeah, dream comes true. But when one dream's finished, you go to bed the next night and you have another dream. And my next dream was perhaps, instead of just one-to-one guiding, was to be the big chief on an Everest expedition. And the following year, I went back, 2009, to be the big chief. And for me, it wasn't quite the same. I found it quite stressful, large numbers of clients, assistant leaders, politics, and it just wasn't the same. And what was good, though, is that we put Amanda Richmond, who was the oldest British female at the time, at age 57, on the summit, plus about 8 other members of the team. So a very, very successful expedition. But for me, it wasn't such a happy one. And I remember coming back from that trip and Simon said to me, "Right, you're going to have to settle down now and do some office work," because I was both a leader and worked in the office. And I was like, is that really what I want to do? And I'd seen Makalu from a distance and I was thinking all the time, am I going to spend the rest of my time now in the office being operations manager, or am I going to carry on climbing? So in 2010, I left Jagged Globe, not as a leader, but as their ops manager, and set up my own business. And as you do, when you set up your own business, you decide that you're going to pay for yourself to go on a trip. So the trip that I was going to pay for myself to go on was a trip to Makalu. Now, Makalu's a different kettle of fish, really, to the Everests. There's not massive support. It's a more technical mountain, more remote. And I went off with an international team, which really didn't have sort of the structure or the organisation. It was a bit like, we're all in for the summit. We all wanted our say. There was a leader, but it was more like a team of individuals going for Makalu's summit. More technical climbing. I did have a buddy that came with me from the UK, Ron, but after a while he decided that he'd had enough, so he went home. And it was while we were at base camp, I just started to develop a little bit of a cough. Now, base camp for Makalu is at 5,700 meters. So, a bit of cough, not unusual. And one of the other team members, Guntis, said, "Oh, I'll take you to a doctor." He said, "I know there's a doctor in one of the other teams." So off we went, and the doctor thought, "Oh, it's a bit of altitude cough, but looks like you've got a urinary tract infection as well. So have some antibiotics, and I'm sure you'll be okay." So I had some antibiotics, and then eventually, after quite a while, our summit window came. Now, I've never been the fastest, and I've never been the slowest. But I remember leaving high camp, as you do at 9 o'clock in the evening. I got out of my tent, put my oxygen cylinders on. We're about 7,400 meters now. And there was a big pop, which I sort of ignored. And then I remember walking, and I just had, number one, an insatiable thirst. And number two, it was like sucking air through a straw. Like, God, this is a bit unusual. And I was just getting further and further behind the rest of the guys. Pennington kept plodding and plodding. And this is the French couloir here. And I remember sort of working my way up to this couloir, up to the boulder that you can just see here on the right. And I got there and I wasn't feeling well. We did have two Sherpas on this team, and one was actually behind me. So as he passed, I just said to him, "Right, I'm turning round," and the others were all ahead. And it was then, it was like feeling very, very drunk, very, very quickly. And I remember the whole world starting to spin. I remember losing control of a lot of my senses. And I remember cowering behind that boulder. And I was thinking, right, just about enough energy, just about conscious. I need to get further down. Because that's, as we know, the only way where you can sort of reduce the effects of altitude. It didn't seem that my oxygen was working too well. And I remember abseiling down this French couloir, about 10 or 15 abseils. And this is, I always say to people, if you're going to go to these mountains, you've got to have all these skills that are second nature. I got to the bottom of the French couloir, and I think that was it. I think I totally exhausted myself. There wasn't anything else. And I must have become semi-conscious or unconscious. At some stage, later in the afternoon, I was woken up and shaken awake by Arnold, who was the sort of so-called team leader, and this other guy. And they found me, and we got some dexamethasone that was in my rucksack and injected me with everything we could think imaginable. And they dragged me across to a tent high up on the mountain, not at Camp 3. And I remember all of us it was like a tent sandwich. It was one man tent, and we all just got in, one on top of the other. And I remember this guy looking at my oxygen saturation and going, "Oh gosh, it's about 35%. I was like, I remember thinking, that's not good. Meanwhile, on the radio, we could hear other things from our team member. There was a guy called Moore who was from Greece, and he was crying high on the mountain, saying that he was lost, and we had no sign of Gunter. So this whole trip has actually fallen to bits a bit. Anyway, the following morning, Arnold and the other guy said, "Look, we'll go down and we'll send somebody up." But I know with two Sherpas to support our team, there would be nobody else to come up. So that's when I started crawling down, making my way down. And then when I got to Camp 3, I saw a body outside one of the tents, and I went over to it, and it was in fact Guntus. Guntus had got down to the tent, but his hands were so badly frostbitten that he couldn't actually get into it. So me and Guntus teamed up. Moore was still crying on the radio, and not quite sure how we did it. This was us. We dragged ourselves down to another camp, down to Camp 2. I remember at this stage, I was probably in a worse state than Guntus. But I said to him, like, "You carry on down, Guntus. I'll just stay here for another day." But he said, "No, we're going down together." And eventually, Guntus and I got back down to base camp. And what I couldn't understand was that I still wasn't recovering. I've done a first aid course, so there's Guntus's hands all bandaged up, and Guntus and I flew out from base camp, got back to Kathmandu. I actually flew straight back to the UK and Guntus back to Switzerland. In the meantime, we did get news or no news from Moore, so we had to presume that he had died on the mountain. So it was just, oh, this is not how you want a trip to go. I remember getting back to Sheffield and I still wasn't well. And eventually I was admitted to Chesterfield Hospital. I spent a few months there and then eventually into Sheffield Hospital, where they diagnosed an empyema, which is a big abscess on the lung. So they opened me up, cleared the abscess off, and I started to feel a bit better again. But it was like, oh dear, that was quite a shock. And would I ever go back to altitude? Would I ever climb again? But being determined, thinking I've just started my own business, I'm going to have to climb, even if it's lower altitude climbing, I need to start the process off again. So second time in my life, these events are 10 years apart and we haven't had another one, thank you. I remember climbing in the lakes, walking up a hill, and there was prayer flags there. It's like, yeah, I need to go back. But obviously I had a little bit of work to do. I needed to see if my operation on my lung had affected my ability to operate at altitude. And it was at this time my dear mum decided that she was going to put a deposit down on a Makalu trip for me. Jagged Globe were running a Makalu trip the following year. I was like, thanks, Mum. Not sure I want to go back that soon. She said, I'm sure you'll do it. I'm sure you'll do it. And so it was a matter of getting back to the Alps, training in the Alps, hitting that 4,000 meter barrier. And then I went back to Ecuador. Here's a picture of me on Cayambe. So that is, getting 5,500 meters. So I thought, right, well, at least I can trek in. My lungs operating again. So that was all great. Unfortunately, on that trip, and just a little side story, Ted fell down a mountain. And to be quite honest, it was sort of like losing your best buddy. I know it's only a teddy bear, but it was like, oh, is that an omen? Am I never going to go back to the mountains? But the Keto Mountain Rescue team called me on New Year's Day and said, should we go and rescue Ted? So that's what we did. And there he was. We found him after 7 days, lying on the slopes. And there's Marco. That cost me $150 for beers all around for the boys. But never mind. Ted was back in action. So the following year comes around soon. It was back to Makalu. And I remember it's very different. I was very scared. I was very apprehensive. I'd made sure that I walked in really, really slowly. But it was a different atmosphere in this team. We had a great leader, Robert Anderson, and Ted had taken some friends as well. He was also wearing a helmet to make sure if he fell again, he wouldn't bash his head. And it was more about looking after each other. And so as time goes on, we had a better weather window. And here we are going from Camp 3 up to Camp 4. And this time, rather than going straight from Camp 3, we decided to go from Camp 4. Felt stronger. I'd gone back to using the top-out oxygen system that I'd swapped to using a different system on that previous Makalu. Feeling good, feeling strong. There we are, back up at that boulder. I had said to Moore's family that I had been in touch with that I would look for him, because we did wonder if he was still sort of lying around there, but unfortunately didn't see anybody. And off we go up the final slopes of Makalu. I remember Robert Anderson, we didn't have any time on this expedition to fix new ropes. And I remember Robert saying, don't attach to anything, just climb. So it was pretty good. It was pretty full on out there. And there we were. Finally, I had made the summit of Makalu in 2011. And I'm saying, hi, Mum, thanks very much. So for me, this was like great. I can go back to altitude. I can operate altitude again. And Simon's still back on the blower saying, actually, we've got, I know you don't like leading big numbers of people in the mountains on these 8,000 meter peaks, but we've got 2 clients that would like to go to Lhotse. Do you fancy that? Well, the obvious answer was, oh, yes, absolutely yes. And Lhotse is, again, it cuts off from Everest. You go up the Lhotse couloir, which is actually this couloir over to here. You can't actually see it, it's a bit distorted. And so that was it, back to the Everest base camp. And it was nice just to have a couple of clients. One was called Scott, one was Ron, who I'd climbed with before. And it was all going really well. Small little team until this decided to hit us. Luckily, we'd just arrived at Camp 1. I remember hearing the bang, and I shouted to Ron, just got in the tent, so I shouted to Ron, hold on to my feet, Ron. And he held on to my feet, and we just got the downdraft that was just pushing or sucking me out of the tent. And the devastation of the tents wasn't too bad, actually, but it did give me a real frightener. There was one Sherpa that was blown into a crevasse, but he was uninjured, luckily. And I remember it's a bit like having a car crash, really. You know, when you've had a bump and a big scare, and you're a bit nervous. And I remember radioing down to base camp, and Nima was our surder, and I go, Nima, we've just been avalanched. And he's like, yes, I know, Diddy, I could see. And it was like, do I go up? Do I go down? And I actually decided that we would carry on up to Camp 2, because the rest of the Everest team was up there, and it felt like safety in numbers. So Ron and Scott came with me, and we all got to Camp 2. And it was there that Scott made his decision. And I always remember him, you know, he was a pretty honest guy, and he goes, this is my best American accent, by the way. Hey guys, he says, I have a wife, 2 golden retrievers, and a son and daughter. And I'd rather go back economy than freight. I'm like, yep, totally understand, Scott. So Scott went back down with one of the other Sherpas, back down to base camp. Ron stayed around for a little bit, but then Ron also decided that actually he felt the risks were too high. And it wasn't surprising, actually, because when we were at Camp 2, I remember the radio going berserk, and I sort of dived on the radio, and the Sherpas were shouting from above that a block of ice had come down the Lhotse face and had hit one of the Jagged Globe Sherpas, Pem Chiri. Now, Pem was a very close friend of mine. We'd worked together on Amadablam, on Dhaulagiri, so lots and lots of trips. And I remember David Hamilton, who was the Everest leader, and myself, and some other leaders from other trips, sort of getting up to Pem. The Sherpas did an amazing job of getting him down the Lhotse face. And here he was, here's Pem being stretched out. And I remember feeling exhausted, running around at this sort of altitude. We managed to get a line into him, managed to get him back down to Camp 2 and back down to Camp 1, where they sent in a helicopter to take him away. I just remember looking at Pem's eyes and just, you know, feeling for him, because it looked like he had a quite serious upper leg fracture and a shoulder fracture as well. So that was the story of Pem. And I went back down to base camp, and I just thought, oh, you know, perhaps that's it. And it was actually Robert Anderson that got in touch with me while I was at base camp, and he said, Adele, go back up. So off I went, and this time I was just with my Sherpa, Kilu. Obviously, both our clients had gone, and Kilu and I went back up. Everest had changed in those few years. We joined the queue. This was a picture that many people have seen before in the press. It was getting busier. We did jump around the queue a bit, And finally, Killer and I made our Ascent of Lhotse. I'm pretty proud of that ascent, actually, because not many people have got that picture, and that's from the summit of Lhotse, looking over Everest. And you'd really think, that's 8,000 meter peaks, Adele. Come on, have you not had enough by now? And just to add to the little story as well, Pemchiri, who we did rescue there, was one of the Sherpas that has recently summited K2 this winter. So yeah, he made a full recovery, and he's been to the UK. He stayed in my house. We helped him get his guides exam. So well done, Pem. Just had to bring that in there. So time went on, and I suppose I sort of moved away from the 8,000ers for a little while, and led some trips to India for Martin Moran. But when a bug's got you, a bug has got you. And I was thinking, God, I haven't been to 8,000 for a long time. This was 2014 now, and perhaps I need to go back. So by now I'm sort of moved up to Scotland, and my business is rolling. Doing a lot of Scottish winter climbing, doing more sky trips. I thought, right, I think I'll go to Dhaulagiri, because I've been on Makalu, done Everest and Lhotse, done Cho Oyu, tried Shishmapangma. Let's go and have a look at Dhaulagiri. So off I went with an American team, actually, 5 lads from America, to Dhaulagiri. Now, I knew in my heart that this trip was a little too early. I knew that we might hit some bad weather, but it was an opportunity that had arisen, and I trusted the guys that were going. But unfortunately, on that trip, the weather was pretty bad throughout it, and it was a bit like, okay, got up to Camp 3, did a lot of learning, got down safely, but I did know that one day I would go back. But it was on this trip that I met this lady. This is a lady called Pari, who is from Iran, and she's an Iranian mountain guide. Now, that's pretty unusual, and Pari's pretty unusual. And so I sort of arranged a trip, as you do, to go out to Iran, because I actually didn't realise there were mountains in Iran. There's Damavand and Tokyo. Recently, there was a big avalanche on Damavand, actually. Pari and I became friends, and I took some clients out to go up Mount Tokyo and Damavand. And I tell you, it really struck me the cultures of the Iranian people that go to the mountains. And, there's a lot more dressed in their natural dress. And I just found Iran a totally absorbing, beautiful country to go to. And I'm really pleased I visited it. And one of the clients on that trip, Colin and I have been friends for years. He got to know Pari, and Pari and I were like, oh, it'd be great to go back to Dhaulagiri. And I have to say that Colin came up with a very, very generous gift to us both, in giving us both a little bit of money to go. And he said what he would like to do is to come out and be base camp manager. So I was like, wow, that's pretty impressive. So Pari and I organised our own little expedition to go to Dhaulagiri. We had a couple of trekkers with us. We had Colin with us. She had another friend, Hattie, who was going to climb. And off we went back to Dhaulagiri. And I remember we met up, and I'd hired a Sherpa, because me and Pari both hired a Sherpa, and this was Lakpa. Now, I think Lakpa might have spent a little bit too much time in Kathmandu between trips. I was a little bit worried when he was puffing and panting his way up the hillsides and everything. But what I learned during this trip is, never trust people by their looks, or never take looks in. And what happened was Lakpa became one of the most loyalist Sherpas, strongest Sherpas that I've ever had the pleasure of climbing with. He was just wonderful. So we get back to Dhaulagiri, and as usual, can't really see much in this slide, but conditions were bad. And I'd remembered going back down from Camp 1 before. You have to go under what's called the Little Eiger. And I remember being petrified last time, but this time I was even more petrified. If you can imagine walking across the Cairngorm Plateau in a whiteout, and then surround it with whooshes and bangs of avalanches coming down and not quite being climatized. I remember this was one of the times in my life where I was really having to control the fear. I could feel, as girls do, we don't tend to shout and scream, but I could feel the tears welling up inside me. And thinking, I really don't like this. And we got down to underneath the Little Eiger. It was just one avalanche after another avalanche. And it was a bit like, right, there's the avalanche, run. Well, at that stage, I wasn't very acclimatized. And I remember that the running was just, it was just outrageous. And we got back down to base camp and I was like thinking to myself, do I really, really want to put myself through that again? You have to think, what is the point? But then, as things settle down, the mountain settles down again, you get sort of a bit of spirit. And I remember sitting there, this is Colin, he had really bad toothache. Time was drawing on this trip. We'd spent a lot of time at base camp. And I had said to Colin, well, you could go back home. We could get you sent back home or back to Kathmandu, get that tooth. And he said, no, I'm staying. So we filled in with ibuprofen. And Colin was there until the end. And the end was looming, really. And we were looking for some weather windows. And that's what you do. You have to sort of be an expert at lots of things on these trips, oxygen cylinders, meteorology, food, supplies. And when the weather's from these graphs, which you might not be able to read the dates, but when it's in the red, it's not the time to go. When it's in the green, it's a bit better because you only want to climb when it's less than 20 kilometers an hour. So on the graph on the left-hand side, we could see that there was a weather window coming in for the 18th of 19th of May. And that was right. There's our date. Look at that. Winds are dropping. Excellent. Because it is the wind and obviously heavy precipitation that does prevent you from going high. So we've got everything mobilised. Parry wanted to go without oxygen. Haddy wanted to go without oxygen. I wasn't going to go without oxygen. But what I did was I made sure that we had enough tents, enough oxygen for everybody up at the high camps, up at Camp 3s, and we left. Now, the following morning, I was ringing down to base camp and they said, unfortunately, your weather window is decreased. And I said, well, how much by? And they said, well, quite a bit, really. And I thought, right, well, it is only our last weather window. So we'll have a go. So off we went, feeling a bit happier this time. Big heavy rucksacks as usual, moving between Camp 2 and Camp 3, all nicely tucked up in a down suit and a windsuit there, ready for the high mountains. And I remember getting up to Camp 3 and starting to dig platforms. Obviously, this isn't a commercial trip. You do the work yourself. We had myself and Lakpa and Parry and her Sherpa, and we were digging, trying to get the tents up. And I really, really knew it was going to be very windy. I think that night there was about 5 of us in one tent. As the night settled down, the winds dropped, and I could feel that sort of buzz, the buzz of, is this really, really going to happen? And usual time, 9 o'clock, we left, and it was an absolutely fantastic sunrise. Now, there had been some other teams there, and there were some old fixed ropes. Obviously, we were using them, and sunrise was absolutely fantastic. We were still quite a way off the summit, and usually, we're saying, right, 2 o'clock return. You don't want to push the boat out. And I remember coming across here, and then we went a little bit further, and there's Parry coming out, and then all of a sudden the fixed rope stopped. And that's fair enough. We hadn't organised for Sherpas to go out and fix ropes, but what you do, you traverse across this big wide open slope. At this time it wasn't too avalanche prone, I hope, from my judgment only. But I remember thinking about Lhakpa, he's a Sherpa. He's probably used to working with fixed ropes and using them and setting them up. And I remember saying to Lhakpa, look, Lhakpa, I'm going to carry on. Parry was going to carry on. She had gone on to oxygen now, good girl. And I did say to him, look, I don't expect you to come with us, because it is unfair of me to expect the Sherpas just to carry on, especially when there are no ropes. Lhakpa said, no, he was staying with us. And as we walked across this big slope, lo and behold, I found about 150 meters of rope just lying there. Now, this big slope isn't too bad, quite easy to walk across, but it was the final couloir where I thought this rope might be of use. So never leaving anything behind, it was picking up a bit of tat. It was a big bit of tat, that rope. I dragged it up to the final couloir. Lhakpa helped me fix it, and we all managed to eventually get up to the summit, but it was late, 4 p.m. on the 18th of May, 2017. That was me and Parry. Parry was obviously the first Iranian woman to summit Dhaulagiri, and I was the first British woman to summit and get back down, because Jeanette Harrison unfortunately was killed at Camp 3 on Dhaulagiri. So folks, that's coming to the end of my tale. There he was. It was so nice to see Lhakpa, my Sherpa, who got what he deserved of getting a ascent of Makalu. Thank you to Colin. Thank you to Parry, who supported us. And thank you guys for all listening this evening. As we know, there's more adventures close to home. There you go. A bit closer to you guys. This was the Slot Ice Fall on the 11th of February, just a couple of weeks ago. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening. Hello.
Yeah, hello. That's brilliant. Thank you, Adele. That's fantastic. What an amazing, adventurous life you had, and it strikes me that to climb 8,000 meter peaks, you've had to have about eight or nine, no more than that, 10 attempts. So it's not as though you go every time and it's a success with every trip. I mean, there is more often than not, you've got to you have to have a trial run first, because the weather is such a critical factor. There's a number of questions that come through, but one thing I'd just like to ask is about how you juggle the kind of your own business and the commercial requirements of your business with your private trips and going off to have your bigger adventures on your own. Is just the way you can work that in planning. Is that?
I don't know very much money, Mike.
Right. Okay.
Well, I tend to. My heyday for my own guiding is probably the winter season, and then September for Sky, and obviously, yes, I mean, you don't get paid when you're away, but that is something that I decided that I was happy with, and I live a very mediocre life, very happy one.
I don't think mediocre. I think modest, maybe.
Modest, okay. Modest life, okay. Not very good at command of the English language, but yeah, and I sort of managed to work and save my pennies. I had my own expedition pot. Obviously, Colin's contribution was great.
Yeah.
And I think I might have been changing a little bit, because I did get to the age of 50 and go, pensions. What happens when you get a bit older? So, I'm starting to think.
But are you clear that you don't really want to do guiding on the 8,000 meter peaks? You'd want to do your own expeditions there.
Yeah, I think now it's a difficult one, because I would perhaps go back and guide Gasherbrum, which I didn't summit on. I haven't talked about that one on this trip. But I'd rather not guide at 8,000 meters, and that is my personal choice. There's many great guides out there who want to do it. I suppose it's like, the more time to go into the lion's den, am I going to be bitten again? Having that incident on Makalu made me realise something can happen to me. And I just think, the responsibilities are massive. So I think if I go back to 8,000 meter peaks, it will be in a non-guiding capacity.
Yeah. Okay. I've got a number of questions popped up. Nick Kurth is asking.
Hello, Nick.
I suspect a lot of these folks will be familiar, judging by the comments and questions that are coming. But what Nick's asking, what are the 3 key events or stories that Ted would recall about your climbing career? I imagine one of them will be the rescue, but
yeah, one was his rescue in Ecuador, which was absolutely superb. Actually, I never thought the mountain rescue team would come and say that they were prepared to go and rescue a teddy bear. Another one was Ted's final last climb, which was in fact Alpamayo 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When Ted was on the back of my rucksack, and he just decided it was just too steep for him, and he really didn't like climbing, and that he was 22, 23 now, and didn't really have to do it. So that was him hanging up his boots. I'm not quite how old he is in bear years. And I suppose
Alpamayo is a good one to be a last one. That's a glorious little peak, isn't it?
And I suppose his first one was, he was with me on the accident in 1999. That was his first. And when I was taken into Chamonix Hospital, I remember having him sort of tucked in my jacket. And I remember even the sort of pilot that came and winched me, and I stood in the stretcher all the way out to Chamonix Hospital. But I remember when I got into Chamonix Hospital, the nurses taking him off me and putting a little bandage on his head as well. It's been with me for a long while.
Lovely. Just picking up from that, David McQueen's asking about how important is fear when you get to high altitude. Obviously, it's important for Ted, but how important is it for yourself? That fear to keep your attention, I suppose, and keep you focused?
Yeah, I think our minds go. Even when we're on oxygen, our minds are exhausted. I think if everything's pretty okay, then you fear. Yeah, if I suppose if everything's okay, I'm not really frightened. I think I was scared on Cho Oyu because I was on my own. But I have trust and faith in things around me. I think the fear comes when, like when I was coming down from Dhaulagiri and we're having to go under slopes. And sometimes you just don't want to go up or down. And so, it's about sort of slowing yourself down, thinking about it rationally. You can't stay there. You have to do something. You have to make a decision. And so you weigh up the risks and take the best decision that you can.
Yeah.
And I think when you're making that decision for yourself, it's a lot easier than when you're making that decision for a team of people.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a sort of supplementary to that from Nick, who's asking, how's your attitude to risk change as you've got older?
Can you just say that again? It just broke up a little bit.
Yeah, I've got some feedback. Has your attitude to risk changed as you've got older?
Yes. I want to live. Yes, I think it matures. Yeah, I think it's like, I suppose, when I say that, I don't know whether I'd have the guts to go and solo Cho Oyu myself now. I think realise more about seeing more. Sorry?
I think our sound is some getting echoes. Some hang on, let me just. Is that better? Yeah, I think so. I think we're okay again now. That's great. So yeah, sorry, you were saying about just as you've got older, you've got more concerned about risks, and particularly if you're guiding other people. So it's not just your welfare; you're responsible for the welfare of others. So you're bound to be a bit more cautious, aren't you? In those
as you get older and the more times you've been into the mountains, you see more that happens.
Yeah.
I've now, it's like, oh, I think I've seen it all. No, I haven't. I'm sure I'll see more, but it's like, oh.
I got another question from someone I suspect you know. Do you know a Jim Savage? Because
I know Jim. Hello, Jim.
Because Jim's asking, how would your climbing career have been different with longer legs?
You can shut up.
I'm not sure that deserves an answer.
It would have been easier because I would have got trousers to fit me, and then I wouldn't be like a terrier in deep snow. I do find walking in deep snow quite hard work. I am a tall 4'11". So yeah, it's hard work, and the whole size of me. I think people will say, "Oh, well, your kit's smaller," but those first trips to Aberdablem, that rucksack weighed 30 kilos, and I weigh about 52. So, big heavy weights to carry.
Yeah.
But I've never sort of tried to say, I can't do it. But I just know me, that's the way I go. And Jim Savage, my legs are fine.
Okay. Maisie Gorman, she's asking, have you ever been caught in a serious avalanche on the high tops? I mean, you've clearly had some close encounters, but have you ever actually been caught up in one?
Well, we had that one where on Lhotse, but I suppose that the most serious avalanche I've been caught in is on Ben Nevis.
Yeah.
A few years ago, quite a long time ago, actually. Walking in, and it was just above going up towards number 4 gully, and it was somebody. There was quite a lot of climbers out, and I presume somebody went through the cornice on North Gully, and it triggered the slope, which came over as a massive powder avalanche, which we don't normally get. And it did take myself and the 2 people I was with away and took us down the slope. But yeah, luckily one of the people was buried, but I managed to get them out because we'd actually tied onto the rope. So not so much in the big mountains. I think you get hit by one of the big avalanches in the big mountains, you're not here to tell the tale, really.
That's right. Yeah.
But yeah, definitely Ben Nevis. Been my closest call.
Yeah, very scary stuff, I should imagine. Yeah, great. Casey Dene, she's just saying, great talk, great to hear your stories, but hopes to see you in Spain in the not too distant future. So I guess that has some resonance for you.
Yeah. I mean, every year I go out to Spain. I have clients coming out. It's to save being in Scotland in November and December. Which is very nice. So I hope so too. I hope Spanish trips will be back on.
Yeah, let's hope. We can all hope that. In terms of going to high altitude with oxygen, you're clearly convinced that having oxygen is the right thing to be doing. But there's a lot of discussion and debate about that. I mean, and if you have clients that don't want to use oxygen, how do you manage that situation?
Well, I mean, they need to acclimatise more. They probably have to do more rotations. And yeah, I mean, it is up to them, really, at the end of the day. But it was a bit like Parry. In fact, I've never had a client want to do well. They've all said yes, we'd like to do it without oxygen, but then they've got high and went, give us the oxygen. But it was Parry who was the first person I'd come across who really didn't want to do it without, really wanted to climb Dhaulagiri without oxygen. Hattie did manage it, but she became so slow and so cold that, it was right, Parry, well, you're not going to make the summit at your current speed. You're getting seriously cold. You're running the risk of frostbite. It's up to you. I've got an extra bottle here, just by surprise, as you do. Do you want to use it, or do you want to go back down?
Yeah.
So it's a big decision.
The key is that having it there with you. So actually, people have always got the option.
Well,
that's something that really, is that fair on you and on the Sherpas?
Well, yeah. I mean, I wanted to take that bottle because I wanted the extra bottle, because I didn't want somebody to become seriously ill on the mountain, because I don't think that is fair for myself or the Sherpas.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, on these trips where you're not in control of the other people, really, because it's not a commercial trip, and that, then they can do what they like. In fact, Hattie did go without oxygen, but we were pretty concerned for him because he didn't actually get back down from the summit until about 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock the following morning. So we got down about 8 o'clock in the evening, and it was 1, 2 o'clock in the morning before he got down. So that was a long time.
Anxious times.
Yeah.
Okay, there's another 8,000 meter peaks that are still to be climbed by you. Then, have you got any? Do you have any ambitions to climb any more of the 8,000 meter peaks? And if so, which would be next on your list? Which would you want to do?
I never say never, but I am getting old. I'm 55 this year. I think it would be Gasherbrum.
Yeah.
I would like to go back to Pakistan. So I suppose if there was an opportunity to lead a Gasherbrum trip, I may.
There's a picture of Gasherbrum above my head.
Is there? I can't see it. So, yeah, it's a beautiful mountain. I've been to Camp 3. But yeah, I'm not quite sure, to be quite honest. I'm not quite sure which direction. I'm actually enjoying the more technical lower peaks at the moment. So it's sort of going back to where I was. I've had my heyday on 8,000ers. Perhaps I'll go a little bit more technical and a bit lower.
Okay, sounds good.
I don't know. Is the answer.
Yeah. Okay, but it's probably quite good not having any sort of fixed plans. Do you have any sort of plans for next year on the assumption that we're all allowed out of lockdown? Do you have any sort of any notions? Nick's asking that again. Nick Earth is just.
Well, I do have a secret plan.
You have a secret plan, okay.
I have a secret plan.
You better keep that.
It's a Scottish secret plan.
Right. Okay.
I don't want to tell anybody because I don't want them to do it for me.
Right. Okay. Well, you can tell us after.
You might have to wait until I start that one. I'm starting on May the 18th. There you go.
Right. Okay. That's intriguing. There'll be a lot of speculation going on now. Yeah.
There's a lot of speculation. Yes, it's a stupid idea, but it's going to be fun. Well, hopefully it will be fun. And it's going to take me 40 days to do. So, this whole thing about earning money when I haven't earned any money and I should be earning money. But I do, one of my decisions in life is to seize opportunities. And I am not getting any younger. That is definite.
Right.
So I can't tell you. No.
Well, you'll have to come back next year and tell us. Once you've done it, you can have another talk.
Well, there you go. Yes, and it will be completely different because it won't be going abroad.
That's right.
It will be about Scotland.
Well, that's excellent. Yeah, that's right. So that'll be.
I'll tell you that.
Okay. Well, Rob Wimmer, he's saying that he's missing staying with you for the winter season, and he's betting that you're missing his cooking. Is that?
Rob, yes, I'm missing cooking. Yeah, and it's a real shame this year not to see all. The mountains are quiet, and we miss all the folk and the instructors that come up for the season, really. And I definitely miss Rob cooking for me.
I'm trying to find where the question is, but what somebody's asked. I mean, again, lots of comments saying how much they've enjoyed the talk and what a pleasure it's been to listen to you. But somebody's asking about a book. You've done so much and you've got so much accumulated experience, and now there's nothing to do in lockdown. Surely a book must be on its way.
Well, I think I wrote about 1,000 words.
That's
as far as I've got.
That's not even a pamphlet.
Pamphlet. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I know, and there's so many other stories, and this is just part of the tale. But there's one problem, and that is sitting down long enough to write.
Well, you found a comfortable spot at the bottom of your stairs.
The naughty step. Yeah, I'm just going to have Jim. Do you want to come down? He's been.
He's stuck upstairs.
He's still upstairs. It's like he hasn't had his dinner yet or anything because he was scared to come down. But you can't hear me. But yeah, writing a book one day.
It would be good. I mean, you've got a good way of telling the stories, and you've got a hell of a lot to share. So it would be, and you've got some great photographs and pictures as well to make it for the coffee tables. So no, it's serious consideration. I think a book that would be.
Would you like to write it for me, Mike?
Yeah, well, okay.
But no, I keep trying. I do try, honest, and I do think. Decision, Dilemmas and Days Out is quite a nice title, but I haven't really got much further. Well, 1,000 words.
Right, and I take it you've been back to Snowdon since.
Yes, I have been back to Snowdon, and I've actually tried to work out. That story does extend itself. Obviously, you can't extend stories too long; I'd be here for weeks. But I think my stepdad, who thought he was a bit of a mountaineer, had never walked up a mountain in his life, got it a little bit wrong, and I think we ended up going up a steep slope and then we walked back. But I do remember it. It was it was the start of I like this. This is the first time I haven't been bored.
That's good. This is Gary Siddle's just asking about. Yeah, he's asking about pork pies. When did you decide they were the best mountain food, and did you have them on Everest?
No, I didn't have pork pies on Everest.
No.
Harry, please don't tell everybody that I eat pork pies. My cholesterol's fine. What did I? No, what do I eat? I eat cheese. Lots of cheese. Cheese triangles. But yes, I do sort of survive the Scottish winter. I survive on pork pies.
Right, okay.
Probably not the healthiest of things, but never mind.
Right. Well, okay. Okay. Well, with your sort of open-ended plans for the future, I mean, presumably you've got your intentions for May, and until then, you're hoping to get out on the skis, I guess, while there's still some snow around.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think I'd rather climb than ski, to be quite honest. I need some new ski boots. Mine hurt. But yeah, I just, we're having to cancel clients.
Yeah.
I just hope we get some really good weather. I mean, I've done loads of climbing for myself this year,
Yeah.
which is great. And just keeping at my main thing is to try and keep fit enough so that when we can go back to work,
Yep.
I'm ready for it.
Okay. Right. Well, there you go. So everybody watching tonight, it's worth getting in touch and provisionally booking some dates in for the summer and the autumn to get back out on the hills with Adele. So that's terrific. And nice to hear. Jim Metcalf just posted saying, "Thanks, Adele. Good to hear from you." And hi, Jim. Jim and I were on a trip, on a jagged globe trip, as it was, together a few years ago. So good to catch up, Jim. Okay, so I think that's really drawing it to a conclusion then. We've had a lot of really complimentary comments. People really have enjoyed the talk, Adele. So thank you so very, very much for giving up the time and going through all the technical anxieties before we started to give us a terrific evening and really inspiring stuff.
So it didn't freeze, did it, while we were talking?
I don't think it did. No, I think it flowed nice and fluently and smoothly. So
Brilliant.
hey! Good. Yeah, it was worth sitting at the bottom of the stairs. So no, thanks, Adele. And if you just hang around, don't switch off, because we'll just have a bit of a wrap up. But if just before I say good night to everybody else, I can just remind folks that our last talk for this season is going to be 2 weeks tonight, and it's another person who loves the outdoors in a huge way. We've got a guy called Craig Murray, who is an extreme skier. He actually came fourth last year in the Freeride World Tour, and it's like watching Ski Sunday on steroids. I mean, it is incredible the stuff he does, and he's based out in New Zealand. So we're going to be live streaming from New Zealand in 2 weeks' time. So it's something that you really ought to join us with. It'll be a fantastic evening again. So thanks to Adele for a terrific night. Thank you all for being with us. I hope you've enjoyed it, judging by the comments you have, which is great to know. And hopefully we'll be able to see you in a couple of weeks' time. Can I just make one final observation? We are aiming to carry on with these program of talks in the autumn and through next winter, and continue to live stream them, even if we can also run them from our local village hall. So if you, either yourself or if you know anybody who has a story to tell and would like to share it with us, we're always on the lookout for speakers. So please just get in touch. You can email me at talksbog@gmail.com, or just through the hall site. Just get in touch, and we're always looking for speakers for next year. But for tonight, it's been a brilliant night. Thanks, Adele. Thanks you all for watching, and I'll say good night and bye for now.